All right.
We're gonna, you know what? I have something popping up on the screen, and unmute, I guess. Okay.
All right, there we go.
There you
All
go.
right. Okay. All right. So what we're going to be doing for you today is our new project, and that's called The Doc and the Chef, and it's actually a YouTube series. We have 16 episodes already filmed, and they come out every other Sunday. And today we have really 3 live episodes that we're going to be doing for you guys.
This came about because in my medical practice and in Caryn's work, teaching culinary education, plant-based cooking, we both realized we kept getting the same questions over and over and over. Do plants have protein? If I don't eat meat, where am I getting my protein? And is soy going to cause cancer? And the list goes on. And so that's the reason we developed this program, this YouTube channel.
Yeah, because we didn't see anything else like it out on social media, or really, it was either a talking head, a great scientist, a researcher, physician, or a chef, a cook, but nobody was putting the 2 concepts together. Right. So that's what we're doing today.
All right. Let's get started. Get started.
Okay, so Jim, you know that I'm going through this new workout routine, trying to just get a little chiseled, get ready for summertime. And so I'm at the gym pretty often, and I'm really, hitting the weights. So, but I also have, I have this monthly get together with my girlfriends. We like to go out and eat and find new restaurants. So last week, we figured out which restaurant we were going to. I looked up the menu online, and we sit down and everybody gets their food, and I'm the only plant-based person in my group. And so everybody gets these beautiful dishes, and I get this lentil soup. And I was so excited, I just was drooling. I was so excited for this soup. And my girlfriend to my left says, "Caryn, I know what kind of workout routine you are going through right now. Right. And there is no way that there is enough protein in that lentil soup to sustain your workouts. So what gives?"
Well, Caryn, I hear that all the time. I hear it from athlete friends of mine. I hear it from patients. When they hear I'm plant-based, the first thing they ask, where do you get your protein? Well, guess what? Plants have protein.
That's what I tried to tell them.
So if you really think about it, right? So you eat a piece of steak or a hamburger for protein. Where did that protein come from? It came from the grass that the cow ate, right? You eat a piece of chicken. Where did that come from? It came from the seeds and maybe a few bugs that the chicken ate, right? And so plants have protein. Now, 10,000 years ago, there may have been a survival advantage for our ancestors to get concentrated animal fat and protein from meat, animal foods, because they needed to get big and strong, get away from the leopard, and find a mate and pass on their DNA before they die of some infectious disease. And now in the modern world, because we no longer, most of us in the Western world aren't really starved for calories, we have the luxury of skipping the middleman and going straight to the plants. Because again, these animals they've already used all the good stuff, the fiber, the antioxidants, the phytonutrients, the vitamins and minerals. They've already used that to run their own machinery.
Their own bodies.
Exactly. And they've concentrated what's left into protein and fat, which we then consume. And so, and we know that many chronic diseases that we see today are associated with the underconsumption of plant-based foods and the overconsumption of these animal foods.
So if you think, well, of course you're the doc, so you would know, but if I'm getting enough protein from that soup, let's talk about this for a minute. So what's a good source of protein?
Well, so first of all, let's talk about how much protein you really need.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Because,
all right.
because that's key, and that
right.
There's a lot of confusion around.
That's
that,
true.
Right? So most people who are kind of average activity level need about 0.36, 0.4 grams per pound, right?
Okay.
So for most people, that's in the 50 to 60, maybe 65 gram range, depending on how much you weigh. Now, if you're athletic, you do need more protein, right? So an endurance athlete may need 0.75, 0.5, 0.75, somewhere in there. A strength training athlete might need up to one gram per pound.
1
right?
gram. So a one to one ratio,
right.
if you're
exactly.
really hitting the gym really hard, harder than me.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm talking about NFL football players, marathon runners.
Yeah.
But guess what? So a few years ago, as you know, to celebrate my turning 60, I fortunately unsuccessfully tried to kill myself. I wanted to do something epic, and I trained for and completed a full Ironman triathlon, right? So 2.4 mile swim, 112-mile bike, then you get to run a marathon, as if that's not enough. And clearly, I needed much more protein in my diet during those hard months of training as I'm preparing for this race. So a whole food plant-based diet has about 75% unrefined carbs. It's about 15% plant-based protein and about 10% fat, so very low fat. So if you do the math backwards for someone like yourself, right? And say you're eating 1,800 calories a day, somewhere in there. And so if you take 15% of that and do the math backwards, that's going to put you almost exactly where you need to be, right? Now, I'm training for an Ironman.
Yeah.
I'm not eating 1,800 calories a day. I'm eating 3,600 calories a day, 4,000 calories a day. So what happened to my protein intake?
Well, your protein intake went up.
It doubled.
Because your calories
Exactly. So it's not protein we need to worry about, it's calories.
Right.
As long as you're getting enough calories to sustain the kind of physical activity you're doing, you will get enough protein.
Okay, so yeah, because it's not like you can go down the protein aisle of a grocery store.
Right.
You're getting your calories, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay. So then let's talk about types of protein.
Right.
Okay, so actually, no, let me ask you this. What happens, because listen, marketing everywhere says protein this, protein that, get more protein, get more protein. So what happens if we get too much protein?
Right, that's a great question. And there are consequences. And in fact, the average protein intake in the United States is about 100 grams a day. So it's almost double of what we really need.
Thanks.
So the carbohydrate and the fat that we consume, we can store that in our muscle cells and our liver. And then that's the carbohydrate. We store that as what's called glycogen, and we can use that for fuel. The fat we can store as fat cells in our fat cells to use as energy for more prolonged exercise. If there's extra carbohydrates, that gets converted to fat, which we store. But we can't really store extra protein. So when we consume too much protein, then we have to get rid of it. So it gets converted to nitrogen, that's excreted in our urine. And so too much protein can put a tremendous strain on our kidneys. And there's association with excess protein intake and things like kidney disease, right? Now, we also know that protein is an anabolic substance, so it promotes tissue growth. That's why when you're lifting those weights, you need more protein, right?
Yeah.
But there's other cells in our body that we don't want to promote the growth, and that's cancer cells.
Sure.
So we're all we all get mutated cells in our bodies fairly regularly, but normally our immune system and such can kind of take care of them before they cause any problem. But you can imagine when we consume too much protein, it stimulates a hormone called insulin growth factor 1, which can promote those cancer cells to divide, which is something we don't want. In fact, there was a very interesting study a few years ago in the journal Cell Metabolism that looked at middle-aged men and protein intake. And the men with the highest animal-based protein had a 75% greater risk of cancer. What was interesting about that, though, when the protein was mainly from an animal source, the risk wasn't nearly as high; it was almost negated. And there's some theories around that. And again, it has to do with which proteins stimulate this IGF, which amino acids stimulate this IGF-1.
So really, it is more dangerous, if you want to use that word, to be eating animal-based protein versus plant-based protein.
That's exactly right. And so, one of the arguments for a long time in this whole protein controversy is that you'll hear this, right? That plants don't have complete protein.
Yes, all the time. I still hear this.
Yeah, they're not complete proteins, right? So what that means is proteins are made up of individual amino acids. And when we consume protein in whatever form, that protein is broken down in our gut into the individual amino acids. And then those are absorbed, and then we reassemble them in our liver primarily to make the enzymes we need, and they reassemble in our muscle tissue to make muscle, and on and on and on. And there's a number of amino acids that our bodies can't manufacture, right? And those are called essential amino acids. So we have to get those from our diet. And the concern's always been, you eat a piece of steak, oh, it's got all the amino acids we need, and that plants don't. And that's just a fact. It's just not true. Every plant-based source of protein has all of the individual amino acids you need. It's just not true.
So there's no more of this having to do rice and beans. There's no more complementing proteins.
Exactly. That's exactly
just eat your plants. You're going to be just fine.
That's exactly right.
I like to get right to the point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because that's what you always heard, right? Is this protein combining and stuff, and it's just not necessary.
Yeah. Okay, good. So that's I mean, I've heard that a little bit, but it's nice just to lay it to rest.
Right.
Okay, so should we get cooking?
Well, what about people who don't get enough protein?
Oh, well, you know what? I didn't even I guess we should address that, but I didn't even really think about that because there's so much talk about more protein, more protein, more protein. Right. You're saying that people are getting too much.
Well, people are worried about it. You go to the gym and that's what they're worried about, right?
That they're not getting enough protein.
Right, right. And so and it does happen, right? But it's mainly caused by calorie malnutrition, right? So, when you see these sad pictures of children starving, they got the big bellies and sunken eyes, those kids are protein deficient. And that's a condition called kwashiorkor. I can honestly tell you, in my 35, almost 40 years of practicing medicine, I have never seen someone walk in off the street with clinical protein deficiency. The few cases I've seen are people, end-stage cancer, who are at the end of life. Yeah. So it does happen, but it's just not something we need to worry about.
Because the two things that you just described, the two times that you might see a protein deficiency, is also going to be a calorie deficiency.
That's exactly right.
So if you're getting enough calories, chances are.
Not chances are.
Okay. If you're getting enough calories, you're getting enough protein.
There you go. That's right.
Okay.
All right. So tell me, I want to learn about this lentil soup that you
made. Okay. So I did a little research and I figured out how they made the soup.
All right.
Played around with it.
And
this is what I came up with. Okay. So first we're going to chop an onion, and this is, now I'm going to do this because I do this all the time, right? This is not how you hold a knife. And this with your index finger on here is not how you hold a knife, because I don't know anybody with an index finger strong enough to get through the beautiful root vegetables that we eat.
Like a butternut squash,
and even even just an onion. Yes, I know. Can you imagine with a butternut squash?
Oh, believe me, back in the day before you taught me the proper ways in the kitchen, I've tried to cut butternut squash with the wrong technique. And you're right. You feel like you're going to rupture a tendon in your forearm.
Yeah, it's awful. It's awful. And actually, by the way, if you want to soften up a butternut squash, put it in the microwave for just a couple of minutes. It just softens it just a little bit. Okay, back to the show. So now the way I like to cut an onion is just, we're going to take off one of the ends. It does not matter which one. And now you have a flat surface and you're a lot more stable. Right. And let's keep a bowl here for our scraps, compost, or extra parts that we can add to a veg stock or a veg broth.
Because this is really all about maintaining control, right? The knife technique you talked about, the flat surface, that's all about just maintaining control, right? So that your dish stays plant-based, so there's not a finger in there.
Right. Yeah. This is, I'm going to use the V word. This is a vegan recipe. We want to keep it that way. Now, so the interesting thing about so many of our vegetables, including the onions, garlic, that whole family is called the Allicin family, Allicin. A lot of the nutrients are on the outermost part of the vegetable.
Right.
So that's why when you are taking the skin off of an onion, make sure you just take off that very, very thin layer so that you are getting those antioxidants in your food.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the antioxidants that are in these Allicin vegetables, so it's garlic, leeks, green onion, shallots, things like that. Those are the plant's natural defense for not getting an infection if they were to get injured, right?
Right.
So when you cut that onion, basically what you're doing is you're disrupting the cell wall. And so the onion is starting to develop these these compounds to protect it from a bacterial or fungal infection. And it turns out those same chemicals have the same effect for us. So some of the most highly anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer foods out there are in fact this whole class of allicin vegetables. And there is some evidence if you let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes, that after you cut it up, what do you chop and stop, or hack in a hole, that will allow those antioxidants to develop even further.
That's right. But here's the thing also, it does have a bell-shaped curve. So when you are starting to get all your ingredients together, go ahead and cut your garlic and cut your onion or whatever. Let them sit for about 15 minutes. And at about that 15-minute mark is when those properties have really come to fruition. And then it's okay to put them on the heat. You're going to be fine. But if you wait any longer, if you pass the 20-ish minute, then those properties start to wane.
To diminish it.
It's still, still a very tasty food. You just want to get the most nutritional bang for your buck.
That's right.
Okay, so we're going to turn on our pot or heat here. I'm going to turn it to high heat. And I'm going to add our onions first.
So I noticed, Caryn, you don't have any oil in that pan.
I do not use any oil in my baking or cooking.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
So how do you keep things from sticking?
Okay, so you want to make sure that you have a very hot pan. Then go ahead and just add in, I'm going to add in mirepoix. So that's going to be onions, carrots, and celery today. And here's the thing. Plants, aside from having protein,
yes,
also have a ton of water in them. So the heat from the pan is going to really just attack the plants and pull out that water. And that is going to help everything start to slide around. Now, we want to pull the heat down to a cooking temperature, which is about medium high. And then here's the thing, you want to stay on top of your food because in just a minute or so, we're going to start to see some evaporation. So the water from the plants is going to leach out, go up in the air, and you do not want to step away from the pot.
Right.
So that's why, and here's also, you know what, can we just talk about oil for a second?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay. So all oil, doesn't matter if it's sesame oil, coconut oil, canola oil, olive oil, it doesn't matter. 120 calories per tablespoon. Right. That is huge. So if you are coating your pan, and you're adding 4 or 5 tablespoons, do the math. Right. You have just added, let's say 500 or 600 calories to your meal, and you haven't even added any ingredients yet.
Right. And not to mention it's in the salad dressing and it's on your garlic bread and on and on.
Oil is everywhere. And I got to tell you, like, if I had the money to hire the marketing company that does all of the commercials for olive oil. Right. No, right. It's incredible. It's so misleading. It's so misleading.
And you know, from a science standpoint, nutrition standpoint, you know, a gram of fat, as you kind of pointed out, has about 9 calories per gram. A gram of carbohydrate or protein only has 4 calories per gram. So if you're trying to lose weight, you're trying to, you know, it's that fat which is driving your cholesterol up, and it's what's making you insulin resistant, you know, and it's inflammatory and on and on and on. So if you're trying to lose weight, lower your cholesterol, you know, et cetera, get rid of your diabetes, limiting your fat intake is very important. And that's really hard to do with a lot of these processed oils in your diet.
You bet it is. And by the way, I know that we're talking kind of a lot about fat right now. People come up to me and they say, oh, if you don't use any olive oil or any oils, how can you have this fat-free lifestyle? Well, I don't have a fat-free, we do not have a fat-free lifestyle. And I wouldn't want that, you know, I mean, that adds such great texture, such great mouthfeel, and it's needed. It's one of the 3 macronutrients that we need, for absorption and all these things. So we like to get our fats. Listen, okay, so this is one thing I think we should say is that every plant that comes up out of the earth, whether it be a bean, some cauliflower, some lettuce, is going to have the 3 macronutrients, That's right? This is what I learned from you, the doc. Have the 3 macronutrients that we need every day to live and thrive. So there's going to be a little bit of fat, a little bit of protein, and a little bit of carbohydrates, even in lettuce. Yes.
Right. And typically the fat that's in those green leafy vegetables are those healthy omega-3 fatty acids, right? And you know, also nuts and seeds and avocados.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get more than enough fat by eating whole foods without having to resort to oil. And you know, as you've heard me say many times, the other way I like to kind of frame this is when I think about, you know, human diet. You know, as human beings, what did we evolve to? Well, we were not hunter-gatherers, we were gatherer-hunters. And what we gathered was primarily unrefined plants, right? There was not a canola oil bush, right? There wasn't a Dr. Pepper nut. There wasn't a, you know, the white flower tree. So as human beings, we've not evolved to use these highly processed oils in addition to these other highly processed foods. And by the way, we didn't have dairy because we had domesticated other mammals and on and on. So we just don't need it.
Well, and I'm happy to hear that. So here's the thing with oil also, just from a culinary standpoint. So we already know, but let's just say it. Why do we add oil to the pan?
Well, so it won't stick.
So what won't stick?
So the food won't stick.
That's right. It's very easy, right? We know this, okay? So that everything slides around. Now, this is what I like to tell people all the time. Like, you know what? You want your food to slide around on there so that it buys you time so that you can get on your phone and look at Instagram or fold the laundry or let the dog out or whatever. Because we're a society of let's do as much as we possibly can in this much time, right? So don't do that with your cooking, please. You're going to ruin everything in here, first of all. But here's what we want to do is if you add oil to your pan and it coats your vegetables and then you eat that, you're also coating your taste buds. So you think that you can taste your food, but if you take the oil out, you taste that food directly. And it's so delicious. So, okay, so when you start to see just a little bit of browning on the bottom of your pan, don't get scared. No, you know that's not it. It's called fond. Those little yummy bits of caramelized food. At the bottom of that pan is called fond, F-O-N-D. Now, what we want to do is deglaze. But this is called a dry saute. And we're going to be adding just a tablespoon or so of either water or vegetable broth to deglaze the pan and pull that fond up off of the pan and back into the food. And it adds a ton of flavor.
Flavor bombs, right?
Flavor bombs. And so then your pan is all clean at the bottom again because all of that fond is back up into the food. Okay, so we've got some nice translucent onions in here, and I'm going to add in our garlic.
Smells so good.
I know. I love this one.
Too bad they don't have like a smell-o-vision on Zoom, right?
You get to work there.
All right.
Okay, so I'm just going to cut up these baby potatoes. These are red potatoes. I'm going to cut them up into bite size, leaving the skin on. And the smaller you cut them, the faster they cook. But there we go, pretty small. This is going to add, just a really nice texture. Okay, so
another just fun nutrition fact about potatoes. We talk a lot about people who have high blood pressure, right?
Yeah.
We talk a lot about salt, limiting your salt intake, which is important, and really trying to limit it to about 1,500 milligrams a day. But what's probably more important with regards to blood pressure is not the absolute amount of salt; it's the ratio of potassium to sodium. And what you're looking for is about 3 to 1, so about 4,500 milligrams of potassium to about 1,500 milligrams of sodium. So, what's the food that pops in your mind when I mention potassium?
Bananas.
Right. That's everybody, right? Yeah. So bananas have about 400 milligrams per banana of potassium, which is okay. Yeah. That means you got to eat 10 or 12 bananas a day.
Oh, to offset the sodium.
Yeah, right. This potato right here has over 1,000 milligrams of potassium. So white potatoes, sweet potatoes, things like beet greens, the spinach that we're going to add a little bit later.
Yeah.
So, we're packing not only the protein in here, it's the potassium and all the other phytonutrients because, again, food is medicine, right? And that's how we should think about it.
I love it. I love it so much. Okay, so the garlic we can smell the garlic, and that's when you know it's time to add in the next ingredient. And that is going to be our potatoes. So I'm just adding in 2 potatoes that are cut to bite size. And we'll make sure that you cut them bite size because they have to fit onto a spoon, right?
But they'll
Then-
cook faster too.
And they will cook faster. So get them nice and wet. And now we have, right,
Coriander,
coriander.
cumin.
And I like to put this in before I add in the rest of my liquid because I want the spices to stick to the vegetables. And then they'll also toast a little bit. So they'll start to really open up and become very, very fragrant. Oh my gosh, so fragrant.
I know,
Smell it.
I know. It's that cumin. That
Oh
cumin
my
is so good.
Gosh, it's so good. All right, so now what I'm going to do is add in, now you can buy just dried lentils, totally fine, or there's some canned lentils, and then I like these steamed lentils.
Right.
Just got them at Trader Joe's, but most grocery stores will have them. They're just in this box.
Yep.
And they you can find them in the produce section. So they're already cooked. We're just going to warm them up. Whoop. So I'm going to add in about half of the package. The ratio is totally up to you. We do offer the recipe, all of these 3 recipes on our website. You want to get those going. I'm going to put these in here too. And then okay. We have a few jumpers here. Okay. So you're getting now all of that, all the lentils are nice and covered with spices as well. And now we'll go ahead and add in our vegetable stock. And then turn our temperature way down. And then we're just gonna let it hang out and cook. Yes, sir. All right, actually, I'm gonna add just a pinch of salt and a little bit of pepper. And then let all that cook in. Okay, so.
Well, and so, when this is ready, we'll talk a little bit, but people worry a lot about protein, right?
Well, I mean, I hope they don't after this.
Right. But what should we be worrying about?
Oh, my favorite F word.
It's fiber,
Yes.
right? So, as I mentioned earlier, the average American gets twice as much protein as they need and less than half of the fiber. So why don't we take a quick break
Okay.
for a couple minutes? We're going to reset things and we'll be right back. And we're going to talk to you about fiber, Caryn's favorite.
Okay, we'll be right back.
We'll be right back.
So you're gonna put this over here.
Oh, okay, there you go.
All right. So we're back.
We're back. Okay. And let's go. Okay, so yeah, let's really get into it. Again, it is, I mean, truly it is one of my favorite F words because, and I don't want to make a joke about it, but because it's so important. Just as we ended the last segment with protein, okay, we get enough protein, we don't need to worry about it. The real thing we need to worry about is fiber. Once and for all, what is fiber and why is it important?
Right. So fiber is, well, first of all, fiber is only found in plants. And it's the undigestible part of the plant that we can't use for food. And so it does some other things, which we'll talk about in a minute, as it transits our GI tract. And it's very, very important, right? So there's broadly, there's two kinds of fiber. We talk about soluble fiber, and we talk about insoluble fiber. So it's just what it sounds like. So soluble means it dissolves in water. And when soluble fiber absorbs water, it creates this kind of gel-like mass, right? Which kind of slows down emptying from the stomach. It modulates the release of any sugar or carbohydrates into the bloodstream. So
no insulin spike?
Exactly.
Or sugar spike.
Exactly. It helps absorb some of the cholesterol and fat. So it's not absorbed. So it helps lower cholesterol. It also, the soluble fiber serves as food for a healthy gut microbiome. And as we're learning more and more about the gut microbiome, you know, I think it's the next kind of revolution in medicine, if it's not already, right? You know, if you think about, you know, I used to think our gut was something inside us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You go to the operating room and open someone up and there's a gut. But if you think about it, you know, our gut is really outside us because it's a hollow tube. It starts at point A and it goes to point B. And its job is to take whatever we ingest in point A and let in the good stuff, keep out the bad stuff, and eliminate it at point B, right? And I used to think that bacteria that lived in our gut were just along for the ride. If we went to Mexico and got some different bacteria, you had to take some Pepto-Bismol for a few days. But it turns out that the bacteria that live in our gut play a fundamentally important role in many kind of metabolic and health processes. For example, the bacteria line the gut. So normally in the small intestine, between the cells, there's what are called tight junctions, right? Because every time we swallow, when we eat, we're swallowing all the vitamins and nutrients that we need, you know, the fat and carbohydrate, protein, but we're also swallowing a lot of things that we don't need.
Sure.
Viruses and bacteria and fungi and environmental toxins like
yummy.
like pesticides and herbicides. And so these tight junctions keep those bad things from being absorbed into our bloodstream. And there's other things like gluten proteins, milk proteins, which are really not designed to absorb into our bodies. When we disrupt our gut microbiome, we lose that protective surface. So there's those tight junctions loosen. And so we start to leak these bad things into our bloodstream, which is felt to be the root cause of many chronic inflammatory processes, including autoimmune disease, right?
Would we call that leaky gut?
Yeah, I don't really like that term because it has some other connotations, but yes, it's basically leaky gut.
Okay.
If we could design an environment in the modern world to destroy the human gut microbiome, we have done it, right? So babies are born with a sterile or very few bacteria in their gut. And then you have a vaginal delivery. That's your first dose of bacteria. And then we breastfeed, so we get bacteria from our mother's skin. And the rest of our lives, we got bacteria from the dirt, right? That's where these soil, that's where these are soil bacteria. It was, you know, we got our food out of the dirt. We played in the dirt. We drank water that had bacteria in it. And we ate a very high fiber, low fat, plant predominant diet, which fed these healthy gut bacteria. Now let's fast forward to the modern world, right?
Yeah, yikes.
We don't C-section babies. We don't breastfeed. We put so many pesticides and herbicides on our food, we have to scrub the dirt off to make it edible. We polluted the water, so we have to chlorinate it. And we pass out antibiotics like they're candy, starting at a young age, which can't tell the difference between good and bad bacteria. And most importantly, we eat a low fiber, high fat diet, so we're not feeding these healthy gut bacteria. And healthy gut and bacteria have been associated with other, besides chronic inflammation, mental health. It turns out, this like blows me away. So when people come in to the office depressed or anxious, one of the kind of go-to drugs was a class of medications called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter that makes us feel happy. And so there's things like Lexapro and Prozac and Celexa, things like that.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that the serotonin for our brains doesn't come from our brains. It's actually, the precursors are made by gut bacteria. And there's a lot of emerging evidence about the fundamental importance of this gut-brain axis beyond our metabolic health, but also our mental health. It's really fascinating.
Oh my gosh.
Right. And so again, it's the soluble fiber, this fermentable fiber that really is important. The other interesting thing, by the way, about soluble fiber, that you can't turn on the news today or read a newspaper article about talking about this new weight loss drug would go over.
Oh, here we go. I
Right?
love this. Yes,
Right?
yes.
So when we eat food, that triggers the nutrients in the food trigger our intestine to make a compound called GLP-1. And GLP-1, you can think of it as kind of starting to put a brake on our appetite. So we've eaten now, right? We're starting to receive nutrition. So when our GLP-1 levels go up, our appetite goes down. Our stomach emptying slows, right? Our pancreas makes more insulin, getting ready to process that energy, right? And what Wegovy does is it stimulates our small intestine to make GLP-1. But guess what else stimulates GLP-1? Fiber, right? So fiber has the exact same effect. It raises GLP-1 levels. It suppresses appetite. It smooths out the blood sugars, because now we don't need as much insulin now, because the glycemic load of the food. So glycemic load is a measurement of the propensity of a given food to stimulate insulin response. So these high fiber foods have a much lower glycemic load, slows gastric emptying. So really, fiber is like nature's Wegovy, right?
Right. Yeah. So you can eat yourself happy
and thin.
and fit.
Right. Exactly. Now there's another kind of fiber called insoluble fiber. So insoluble fiber won't absorb water. It's not dissolvable in water. So insoluble. And so what it does, it helps add bulk to the stool, and it helps prevent constipation. Some of the constipation related illnesses or problems like diverticulitis or diverticulosis, but most importantly, colon cancer, right? Because you can imagine that part of the risk for colon cancer are toxins that we're ingesting get concentrated in our stool, right?
We don't move it through.
And the longer that is sitting in contact with the cells in our colon, the more likely they are to cause a mutation and cause cancer. So the faster you move things through,
Right.
the less risk you have for colon cancer, right? And in fact, if you look at cultures who eat a plant predominant diet, and by the way, most plants like beans have a nice mix. Nice mix, half soluble, half insoluble, right? So nuts are the same thing. It's a mix of the two. But if you look at cultures who follow a plant predominant diet with very, very high fiber intake, they don't have words for colon cancer in their language because it doesn't exist. Isn't that crazy?
No, that is crazy.
Yeah. And here in the United States, we have the highest rates of colon cancer
Well,
in the world.
there's certainly an uptick in the last several years.
Right. And sadly enough, as you probably well know, they've just recently changed the screening guidelines.
Yeah.
So it used to be starting at age 50. They've moved it down to 45 because we're seeing more and more colon cancer in younger people. Most of that, I think, driven by chronic fiber deficiency.
So I agree with you. Yeah. Yeah. So, but the screening that you're talking about is a colonoscopy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's
So
right.
the screening for colonoscopy starts at what age?
45.
45.
Right.
Oh my God. Okay.
And as far as how much fiber we need, again, the average American, believe it or not, gets 10 to 15 grams of fiber a day. You'll hear when we get back to the soup in a minute. I mean, the fiber has in this dish today, right?
Yeah,
Tons of fiber, more than most people get in a day.
Right.
The current recommendations are, 25 to 30 I think that's low. I really think you really start to maximize the health benefits 40 to 50. I really think that's where you should be. And again, the beautiful thing is when we're eating this whole food, plant-based diet, and I do want to make a distinction here. This is important, especially because of the fiber. I want to make a distinction between a vegan diet and a whole food plant-based diet, because there's a lot of conflation out there these days, right? Veganism comes from a place of compassion about not harming other creatures. And I think, granted, I think almost all of us at some point, or still do today, have some cognitive dissonance around where our food really comes from. Right?
I mean, it doesn't come from the grocery
You're
store.
right. That boneless, skinless chicken breast, bloodless, wrapped up nice and neat in plastic. There's a pretty horrific backstory to that. But the food decisions you make are about not harming other creatures, right? So don't eat them, then don't wear them, don't use process them. But as you well know, there's a lot of fiber devoid, depleted, highly processed food that's vegan, right? You can get vegan ice cream and vegan cupcakes and Oreos and white flour and sugar. And a good example is something like Beyond Burgers. I mean, Beyond Burgers are better for the cow and they're better for the environment. And if you compare it to a hamburger, a little bit better for you, but not a health food.
Right.
Highly processed, not a lot of fiber, very high in fat. So again, the point is when we eat these whole foods, it's the whole package, right? It's a package that has protein, it's got fiber, it's got healthy fats, right?
Yeah,
so
potassium.
That's potassium. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
all
Exactly. So what do you have for us here today?
So when we were going over this and you wanted a great fiber filled, and it does also, as you said, it's also full of protein, great fiber filled recipe. I knew that I had to share this one with you.
Right.
And I know that you've had before, you've had many different renditions and you make your own too,
Right.
But this chickpea chicken salad is my favorite. I actually have a girlfriend who, whenever I see her, she starts to the first thing she says is, "Hi, where is it?" Because I've given her the chickpea salad so often that she's just, conditioned to think that I have more for her every time I see her. So this is, as I said, chickpeas. The base is chickpeas, and it's so easy. I mean, don't blink, you'll miss it. This is the easiest recipe, and so many different chefs and cooks have their own. This is my favorite, but it's really easy. Okay, we're gonna start off with just chickpeas, right? Cooked chickpeas, and I like to use a gloved hand. You can use a potato masher, you can use a fork, doesn't matter. But just mash up most of them in your bowl. I don't mash them all up because I like the texture and I like to see what I'm eating, right? So I'm going to mash up most of these here. Now, Jim, I'm putting you to work.
All right.
Here are some, our soup is still cooking and we're going to get back to it.
What do you want next?
Okay.
This?
Let's put in, let's put in some celery and some red onion.
Tell me when.
Okay. When? Okay. We've got a nice mixture here.
What's next?
Okay, let's do the dill relish.
All right.
There's not a whole lot left in there. I think we're good. Yep.
Enough?
More?
Yeah.
Just a little more.
This is very scientific.
Yes, I know. Yes. Yes.
It's not like you're baking bread.
The recipes are available. Okay, so now Dijon mustard. And if you don't have Dijon, you can just use yellow mustard. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's a lot. It's very strong. That's good. Yeah, good. And work that through. You want all of this in every single bite. Okay, now the base of chicken salad most of the time is mayo. And what I like to use is tahini, and tahini is just ground sesame seeds. Now, when you buy tahini, make sure that the only thing in the ingredients part is ground sesame seeds. There might be some salt, and that's fine, but just ground sesame seeds. You don't need anything else. No palm oil, extra sugars, a lot of extra salts, none of that.
And that goes for any really nut butter, right? Because it's not really a nut butter because it's not from a nut, but it's the same idea, right? This is just crushed up sesame seeds. Same thing if you're getting peanut butter, almond butter, you just want peanuts, right?
And a tahini, I use it in the base of a lot of my salad dressings. Mm-hmm. I call it almost like a boring peanut butter. Yeah. Right? Because it does pull everything together. There's a little bit of flavor, but not too much. Lay it on me. Let's do 2 There you go. You have 2 heaping.
Good.
Yep, that's good. So this will really pull everything together. And again, it's up to you how much you want to put in there. Maybe just start with 1 tablespoon and see how you like it. Now we're going to add in some more texture. Almonds, great fiber, great fat, great omega-3s, right? So you didn't think you're going to get that today with this.
So Caryn, so tell me, if I were to go to the deli today or go home and make my own chicken salad.
Oh,
right?
like this chicken salad?
Yeah, no, just regular chicken.
Oh, regular chicken
Right,
salad.
chicken,
Okay.
you know, it's
And
mayo,
mayo.
and eggs.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
how
eggs.
does the nutrition of that compare to this?
Okay, so a regular chicken salad, and I know that a lot of people make it different ways, whatever, but the basic just chicken salad is per half cup is going to be about close to 20 grams of fat. Yeah.
And how much fiber?
Gosh, it's like 9 or 10 grams of fiber.
No, the regular chicken salad.
Oh,
0.
fiber. I'm
Fiber.
sorry. I'm thinking
Yeah.
something. Yeah. So no fiber.
Now there's a lot of protein.
There is a lot of protein, but you don't need that much protein, right?
Right. And then what about this? So how much fat and fiber?
So the that was just a little bit of salt. So the fat content of our chickpea chicken salad is around 8 or so. Yeah. And then the less than half. And then the protein, what do we know?
The protein's about half, but it's plenty.
Yeah, right.
And the fiber though is like what? It was like 6-8 grams, something like that.
This was closer to 8 grams per serving for a half of a cup.
Right. Compared to 0 in regular chicken salad. So again, it's this point that it's the package that our food comes in. Right. It's so important. And I think this is a perfect example about when we get our foods in a package of animal that's primarily based on animal foods, right? What's missing? It's the fiber, right?
It is the fiber. Yes, it definitely is. And here's the thing. So when people come in, you know, we're broadcasting today from the Center for Plant-Based Living in St. Louis. And we do a lot of cooking classes here. And, I'll do that. And when people come in and we talk about fiber and we want to add more fiber to our plates, what does that look like? And we talk about these different foods. And we talk about beans. Like today we put in chickpeas, right? And that's a pretty dense bean. Yeah. Now, if somebody does, really starts eating a lot more beans and they get bloated, okay, that can happen. It happens to me sometimes every once in a while. I've been doing this since 2008. So, and they say, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. I'm too bloated. Okay, just hear me out. If you go to the gym, if you haven't been to the gym in a month or so, if you've never been to the gym, and you go and you've got your favorite playlist going and you hit it hard, and you come the next morning, you're like, you can't even hardly walk because you're so sore. Have you ever said, well, exercise is not for me, it hurts? Right. So it's the same thing with your stomach.
You got to train your gut, right?
You've got to train your gut. So you want to start, if you're starting to add more beans, I would say start with a lentil, like our lentil soup. Right. Because it's very small, it has a very thin skin, and it's very, very soft. A black bean is the same way. It's a very thin skin. Now, a chickpea is going to be fine, but you might want to do a hummus first.
So you're pre-digesting the skin.
Pre-digesting it, yeah. And even here might be okay because you're smushing them. Right. So I that's why you don't want to go full on to 40 grams of fiber the first day. You want to tiptoe up. Right. And on our website, the Center for Plant-Based Living's website, we have a really great free resource, and it's called the Fiber Formula. Right. And I teach people, it's the number one thing I teach all of my students is to do this fiber formula. So for 4 weeks, you train your gut. Right. 1 week, it's 10 grams of fiber. Second week, 20, 30, and up to 40. It's such a gentle way to add more plants. Right. And
what's interesting, the reason that people get that bloating and gas is not the beans, the legumes, it's the gut bacteria. Because if you don't have the right gut bacteria to digest, so these, in the skin of these beans on the outside, there's some compounds called oligosaccharides. And that's just a fancy word for complex sugar. Oligo means like long and lots, and saccharide just means sugar. And so when we don't have the right gut bacteria to process these oligosaccharides of the beans. And that's why washing them sometimes too will.
Yeah.
Wash some of that off. Those sugars get passed into the colon because they haven't been digested, and they actually get fermented, right?
So you're like brewing
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
beer in your gut.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so that's why the fiber formula works, is because you're slowly allowing your gut bacteria to adapt to the higher fiber load in our diet. So that's exactly right. And the reason though that it's not it is the beans, but not directly. It's the gut. It's a gut bacteria problem. Back to what we talked about earlier.
That's so. I mean, I just find it so fascinating.
It is.
So
It
fascinating.
really is.
Okay.
So this is the final product.
Actually, I'm going to bring it up, and we'll do this at the end as well. But I just want to bring this up and show what that looks like. Okay.
I make a version of this, Caryn, with curry powder, cashews, tahini, and then I chop dates and put it in. It is so good. So
You'll make it for me.
yeah, I will. I will.
Okay.
I will. I will. So why don't we take a real quick break before our last segment, and we're going to be talking about soy in our last segment. So
This is
we'll be back in a minute.
okay. Okie dokie. All right, so our soup is still cooking up. Just give it a taste test. Delicious. And then I think we're ready to go. Yeah. So one of the okay, so we have this this soy class coming up at the shop, and it's sold out immediately, which tells me that everyone wants to know about soy and tofu. And really, it's a tofu class, but it's also just a soy information class. And then I had a woman call me, and she said, my girlfriend who is also coming to the class, she paid for her to come. She doesn't know if she could still come because she was just diagnosed with breast cancer, and her doctor wants her to stay clear of soy, which kind of broke my heart because I know that that's wrong in all of my reading, but I want you to break it down and let me know. Okay, there's two things: why soy does not cause breast cancer,
Right.
and we hear this all the time.
Right.
Will it cause man boobs?
No, that's right. And you know the man boobs, this kind of mythology is part of what I call bro science. It's right up there with the protein, right? And you hear it all the time, right? You go to the gym and you hear guys talking. You know, my girlfriend wants to go vegan, wants to feed me tofu, and you know, his buddy's like, no way, I'm doing that. You know, I don't want to get man boobs. And just to set it straight right now, tofu does not cause man boobs.
And
we'll talk and it doesn't cause breast cancer. And we'll talk in a minute about what really causes man boobs. But so there's a lot of evidence around tofu or soy in general and breast cancer. So first of all, if you look at population data, you know, what country in the world has the highest rates of breast cancer in the world? Well, we live here,
us, right?
In the
Yeah.
United States. Who has the lowest rates? What turns out is Japan and the parts of China with the highest soy consumption. And in fact, as research suggests that high soy consumption lowers your risk for breast cancer by about 30%. There's also evidence that soy consumption reduces the risk of recurrence for breast cancer if you've already had it. And now we know that estrogen is a risk factor for breast cancer, right? For example, women who start their periods at a very young age, right? So they're exposed to estrogen much longer over their lifespan. Women who never have children, so they never take a break from estrogen. You know, some of the estrogen-like compounds that you see in things like dairy and, you know, plastic bottles and things like that. We do know those are risk factors for breast cancer. And so the idea is that the concern is soy and some other plants, but soy in particular has what are called phytoestrogens. So phyto means plant. So these plant-based estrogen-like compounds. And so the concern's always been, well, if I take all this extra phytoestrogen, it's going to act just like estrogen and increase my risk. But it turns out that the reason that people think that soy is protective against breast cancer is these phytoestrogens weakly bind to the estrogen receptor, and they actually block the effect of estrogen, right? So so estrogen can't bind to the breast cell and stimulate its growth because these phytoestrogens are in the way.
Are blocking. So the
Exactly.
plants are blocking
The
real estrogen.
That's exactly right.
The extra estrogen that we might be making
That's exactly right.
to create breast cancer.
That's exactly right. And so it does make a difference where the soy comes from.
Okay.
You really want to eat soy as close to the ground as it was grown, right? So when you think about whole bean preparations of soy, right? You've got edamame and tempeh is a fermented whole bean form of soy. And then you've got soy milk, and then you've got tofu. And a lot of people, well, tofu isn't that highly processed. It's really not, because all tofu is you take soy milk and you curdle it, and you scrape the curds off, and you press it in a block, and that's tofu, right?
Yeah. So from bean to block, it's like three steps.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And research suggests about 2 to 4 servings a day of soy. Now, there are most of the soy in the Western diet isn't from tofu and tempeh and edamame. It's from highly processed things like textured vegetable protein, which you see a lot in vegan burgers, for example.
Yeah.
Soy protein isolate, which you see in the big tubs of protein that the bodybuilders are used. Yeah, exactly. Powders. Soy lecithins, which is used in a lot of processed foods. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it turns out there's actually 2 estrogen receptors in the breast cell, and these highly processed soy products look like they activate the other receptor, which may increase your risk. And I think that's where some of this confusion came from, because some of the early studies looked at total soy consumption, not at the source of soy. And when they started to break it down and look at where the soy was coming from, that's when they found that these less processed sources of soy have these health benefits. And there's a lot of other benefits, actually. Soy is high in fiber. Soy, it can improve your bone health, right?
Okay, but why?
Well,
That's important.
Because again, so it weakly activates that estrogen receptor. So postmenopausal estrogen is protective for bones. And so when we weakly stimulate that estrogen receptor, it seems like it helps maintain bone health. The other reason is it's probably the best source of calcium in our diet. So women who are concerned, women need about 800 milligrams of calcium a day, and after menopause, they need maybe 1,000, maybe a little bit more. So as I mentioned earlier, the way tofu is made is you take soy milk and you curdle it, right? And historically, the curdling agent was gypsum, which is calcium silicate. So still today, the way they make tofu, they use a calcium-based compound to coagulate, if you will, to make the tofu. And some of that calcium stays in solution. So, a cup of tofu has about twice as much calcium as a cup of milk, actually. And again, it's also been shown to help lower cholesterol. So there's a lot of other health benefits of soy that go beyond protecting women from breast cancer. Right?
So learn to cook the tofu.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And
Now,
one of my favorite snacks is edamame.
Yeah, no, I love it. I put it in salads and stir fries and on and on. Now let's talk about man boobs, right?
Yeah.
So what really causes man boobs, right? Well, so it turns out that obesity is the biggest driver of man boobs. The clinical term is called gynecomastia. It just means enlarged breast tissue. We got to keep the field exclusive in medicine by using big words to describe simple things.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other causes, things like some specific hormone disorders. There's certain medications which can cause it. But the biggest driver in the modern world is obesity. And the reason is, we used to think that adipose tissue was just a storage vessel for fat. And but it turns out adipose tissue is highly, highly metabolically active. And it has an enzyme called aromatase. And aromatase's job is it takes testosterone and converts it to estrogen. So the more adipose tissue you have, the more of your testosterone that you're turning into estrogen. So it is estrogen that's causing the man boobs, but it's not from the soy. It's from obesity, which is also, by the way, why obese men oftentimes have issues with erectile dysfunction, because their testosterone levels drop, right?
Oh, yes.
Right. And so by losing weight, going on a whole food plant-based diet, losing weight, not only do the man boobs go away, but your testosterone's come back up. It's happy.
That is crazy that testosterone can convert to estrogen.
That's right. Well, in fact, it's one of the reasons that it's felt that obesity is probably one of the biggest risk factors for breast cancer in women today, because women also make small amounts of testosterone. Now, not as much as men, but that testosterone is getting converted to estrogen by the same enzyme. And so women who are obese have much higher levels of estrogen because they're converting some of their normal testosterone into estrogen. So that's why obesity is one of the biggest drivers of not only breast cancer risk, but also gynecomastia.
So extra fat on the body, like too much fat,
That's
right?
That's right.
Really can be the root cause of
A lot of things.
A lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Including it's a risk factor for man boobs and for breast cancer.
Right. Oh, well, happy times.
Yeah. Well, the happy times are we're going to show you how to prevent breast cancer.
Yeah.
Right?
So, and I'll tell you what, I've been on this plant-based diet since 2008, and it took me a long time to feel comfortable with tofu.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't grow up with it.
Right.
And then every time I ever saw it, like in a restaurant menu or watching somebody else eat it or on a TV show, I just thought it was the weirdest thing ever.
Well, especially when you open it up, and you take a little bite and you're like, oh,
It's
this
gross.
is like this
Gross.
cardboard. There's no flavor, right?
Well, there's like zero flavor.
Right.
So let's just get to it. This is just a Trader Joe's. This is a super firm block of tofu. Feel that? That is real heavy.
Don't hit me with that.
Yeah, I know. And just by the way, there are two different types of tofu. So there's this regular type of tofu, and then there's also a silken tofu.
Right.
And both with regular and silken, there is a soft, medium, firm, sometimes extra firm, right? And with the silken tofu, I like to use that maybe I'll put it in a smoothie. I'll make a dip out of it.
Right.
Those are the softer tofus. But
Mousse, you
with
can do like you could do like a dessert mousse, right?
well, so I would with an ultra firm or a very firm silken tofu, I would use that. Yes.
Yeah, but the silken
mousse.
tofu in general, though.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So but today we're using regular tofu, and this is the ultra firm because I want it to stand up. We're going to cube it, and I don't want it to mash down.
Right.
So I'm going to open this up over a bowl. Usually I just do this over the sink. There's very little water in this, in these vacuum packed extra firm tofus. So we're going to just cut this open.
So if there's more, so some of the, like if it's less firm and there's more water, do you use a tofu press, or how do you get press the water out?
I'll tell you what, I just bought my first tofu press like a year ago. I don't use it a whole lot. I use it if I am freezing my tofu and then draining it, I'll do it then, but this is just a regular, we did not freeze this.
Right.
So what I will do is just grab a kitchen towel, a clean kitchen towel, paper towels, whatever you have, and wrap it. And then just give it kind of a gentle but firm squeeze, because again, we want to keep those cubes intact. Okay, so this is real easy. So now you have a pretty dried out cube, and I'm just going to cut this into
Bite-sized pieces.
Bite-sized pieces. You can skewer these up. Doesn't matter. You could you could probably just do little steaks. Little triangles.
Slabs, if you will.
Slabs. That's the word I was looking for. Stuck. All right. So cube these up to bite-ish sizes, and set them aside. I'm going to cut you. And we're going to now create a marinade. And whenever I marinate anything, whether it's vegetables, tofu, anything, I always use a resealable plastic bag. And I'll show you why in just a second. The marinade can be anything you want. I mean, today, it could just be barbecue sauce if you wanted. But we're going to use some coconut aminos, or you can use soy sauce, shoyu, tamari, whatever. But a savory.
So tell us about coconut aminos. How does that compare to, say, soy sauce?
So coconut aminos is a new-ish on the market. It's coconut based, and it's going to be a lot lower in sodium than soy sauce.
And by the way, soy sauce, miso, some of the soy condiments, they're okay, but they do not have nearly as high a level of these flavonoids, these phytoestrogens, as the whole food.
So we're fine with soy.
Exactly. That's exactly. You're not missing much from the soy standpoint by using something like coconut aminos, especially and if you factor in the salt part.
Right.
Probably better.
That is actually good news.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Okay, so I've just added a little bit of sriracha, maple syrup, and our coconut aminos. You could add in some ginger if you wanted to, garlic. It doesn't matter. It's totally up to you. Now
I'm gonna some garlic in
no. I'm just gonna add a little bit of water, just to add a little bit of bulk here, but not too much because I don't want it to lose the flavors. Then you just add your tofu right into the bag. And this is so great because by putting it into a bag and then just get all of the sides well coated. It's hard to do this in a pan, but you can do it in a bag. Right? And then we're going to seal it up and do your best to get as much of that air out of there as you can. And then what I would do now is just place this in the refrigerator. I like to marinate for at least 24 hours, really to make everything just super flavorful. And then every time you open up the fridge, just give it a toss.
Because that tofu is almost like a sponge. I mean, the reason it tastes like sponge and cardboard.
Right. Yeah.
But it's because it's so porous, right? So the longer you marinate it, the more it's going to soak up those flavors, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
So, and it's nice if you just do one whole block of tofu, or maybe even 2 blocks, depending on the size of your family. Okay, so we would put this over to the side for just a second. And now, because I like to dip just about everything, I'm going to make a dip for our tofu. All right, so let's start with, we're going to add peanut butter is actually going to be the base. So it's going to be a nice peanut butter or peanut dip.
And again, when you're looking for peanut butter, you want to be sure. Oftentimes they use palm oil to help emulsify the peanut butter. So you want to be careful with that. A lot of them have sugar added and all that. And what you're looking for is just peanuts, right?
Just peanuts.
Just peanuts.
Yes. All right. So now we're going to add in, we're going to use a lot of the same ingredients. So
Right.
we're going to add in some of our coconut aminos with that peanut butter. Now you are going to,
Just gonna get that ready.
oh, okay, thanks. I'm going to add in some lime. Oh yeah, so good. Okay, and so you ginger. So make sure you have your microplane ready.
Make sure
And
to do it.
yeah, well, that's that. And you like to tell people.
Oh yeah,
that-
so this, I have to tell you, this is one of the favorite culinary tricks that Caryn has ever taught me. She's taught me a lot, but this is a top 5 probably. Because you buy a thing of fresh ginger and you use it in a recipe and you put it in the refrigerator, and a couple weeks later you're gonna do cook another recipe that calls for ginger. You open up your refrigerator and it's all shriveled up
Soft.
and dried up, kind of nasty. And she says, "Oh, you don't need to put it in the refrigerator, put it in the freezer and freeze it." And then you just take it out, as she's done, this ginger straight out of the freezer. And then she just grates it, frozen. And it's beautiful. And then you can leave the skin on. And when you're done, you put it back in the freezer. And so instead of the ginger lasting a week or two, it lasts months.
Months.
Really.
Yes.
So freeze your ginger.
Freeze your ginger.
It's really amazing.
Okay, and then you can put in some, well, actually, see if I can. Our garlic is pretty soft, but I'm gonna see if I can't, oh, there you can. Use the microplane for this as well. Just, let's see, we'll do 2 cloves. Maybe not, maybe. Yeah, we go. Okay, so there we have that. And we're gonna get these little guys on the back end. These microplanes are the best.
Oh yeah.
Gosh.
One of my favorites.
And then just a little bit of water, just so I can whisk it. All right, so we're gonna let this sit for just a minute. Now, let's talk about this air fryer.
Yep,
Okay?
yep.
So I'm choosing to, I'm choosing to air fry our tofu. It's really nice during the summer because your whole kitchen won't get hot. But it's gonna give us that almost that deep fried texture without adding any oil and hardly any calories.
That's right. That's right. Again, when we talked earlier, especially if you look at obesity rates, you look at diabetes rates, pre-diabetes rates, insulin resistance. And I know Robbie and Cyrus have been on this conference and Robbie about talking to Mastering Diabetes, talking about that the root cause of insulin resistance is not sugar. It's actually fat.
Too much fat. Yeah.
Deposits in our muscle and liver cells. And as you mentioned earlier when we were talking about oil-free cooking, oils are ubiquitous. You go to Trader Joe's and you get some really healthy-looking lentil chips, and you look, it's full of oil. So we're getting tons and tons and tons of extra fat. And again, ideally, if you look at ancestral diets, we probably got 10% of our calories from fat. That's like 35 grams a day. And so there's some simple ways to get rid of the fat. Oil-free cooking's one. Air fryer is another, right?
Yeah.
Because, instead of making French fries and fried this and fried that, the air fryer is fantastic.
And if you have an air fryer for as long as I have and used it as many times as I have.
Well, this is like my second favorite, one of my other things you turned me on to.
When I found this. So this is an old school, but I love it, tried and true. The only thing this does is air fry. It doesn't do everything else. But the basket, which used to be nonstick, isn't so nonstick anymore because it's old and I've used it until we found parchment paper.
Right, for the air fryer, right?
It goes right in there, so the air can circulate. Now, let's just pretend, wink, wink, that this has been marinating for 24 hours. And I would put a few cubes in here. I would, 390 degrees, 10 minutes, shake, and then another 5 to 10 more. So we put this in here, turn it on. We're not gonna because it's too loud.
Right.
But Jim, if you want to grab.
But why don't I do this? Why don't we take another quick break and we'll finish up the soup.
Oh, okay.
And we'll show you the finished tofu product, and then we'll move on from there to question and answer. So
yep.
why don't we'll be back in just a couple minutes. We're gonna reset things one for the last time, and we'll see you back in a second.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'm ready to eat.
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So let's finish up this soup that has been cooking, and this whole shop smells delicious.
It does. It does.
All right. So what we're going to do, and this is a great way to add more greens to your diet, soups, stews, anything like that.
Yeah.
Throw your greens in there.
It doesn't matter, right? You can switch chart. I mean, I can tell you, I have some green averse. I had some greens averse kids in my family. And this is a great way to hide the greens, right? Because you can get all that nutrition packed in there. It doesn't really change the flavor too much. And again, it doesn't really matter. Kale, beet greens, Swiss chard, spinach. Great way to increase the nutrition and the fiber in your
And spinach
meal.
is so full of water, this baby spinach, that you can add a ton of it. We've all seen those memes,
right,
where the first frying pan has a mountain full of greens,
right,
and then the next meme, it's like this much.
right.
Okay, so that is already wilted down, and I'm going to add in a little bit of lemon. Now this will brighten it up. This will brighten up your soup. But what most of the time, if I have leftovers, and when I make a soup, I make a ton of soup and eat it all week, right? But leftovers can kind of taste a little, I don't know, just they can lose their luster, right? So if you add brightness from a lemon, you will not get a lemony flavor. It'll just bring all the flavors back to life, right? So we're going to add a little bit here just because it's right now. I'm doing it right now.
And there's another kind of nutrition science reason to add lemon to that soup.
Yeah.
So when we talk about plant-based diets, one of the nutrients of concerns, especially for premenopausal women, is iron, right? So dietary iron comes in two forms. It comes in what's called heme iron. So heme is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the protein in our blood that carries oxygen. It's what makes our blood red, right? So when you eat a piece of, and you're getting that heme iron, where it's actually coming from, and this is really disgusting to think about it, it's coming from some of that dead animal blood that we're ingesting.
No thanks.
Now, our bodies will absorb as much heme iron as we ingest. But here's the problem. Heme iron is highly, highly, highly inflammatory. It's what's called a pro-oxidant. So it can damage DNA. It can cause a lot of adverse health consequences. It's one of the reasons, by the way, that red meat is associated with an increased risk of both heart disease, but also colon cancer, because the heme iron is damaging the DNA in those cells. It's oxidizing the LDL particles as far as heart disease goes. And there are some people, by the way, who have a condition called hemochromatosis, which is a genetic disorder. It's more common than people think, where we can't metabolize iron very well. And so when we eat all this heme iron, it gets stored in our liver and it can cause all kinds of problems. Now, there is iron in plants.
Yeah.
And in fact, both the lentils and the spinach in this soup are packed full of iron, but it's non-heme iron. So it's much more difficult for our bodies to absorb the non-heme iron. However, if you co-ingest a source of vitamin C, like the lemon juice, with these higher iron foods, you'll see absorption rates of heme iron that equal or surpass. Thank you. I'm drooling, from the food. So you'll see actually higher absorption rates with heme iron, and it's self-regulating. So when our iron stores are replete, we will stop absorbing the extra non-heme iron, right?
Our bodies are so smart.
Yeah, they are. They are. So the idea is just do exactly what Caryn did. When you have, you're making a soup or a stew, you add or a salad, with these high iron foods, the green leafy vegetables, the legumes. You put a little lemon juice. You brighten with a little lime juice. Snack on citrus fruits. Red bell pepper is a great source of vitamins.
I add lemon to my hummus.
Yeah, there we go. That's the same kind of thing. So there's another reason we put in these citrus to dress your soup besides brighten it. It can help with iron absorption.
Yeah, and you know what I'm going to do here is I want to show everyone what the tofu looks like at the end. So we've got some nice, let's see, this right here. You can see how those edges look really, really crispy. Yeah, it looks delicious. And then the soup is, there's just so much going on in here, right?
So much flavor.
So much flavor. Yeah. Okay. So, I think. Yeah. If it's okay if we eat while
we maybe, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't eat with our mouth full.
I know.
We'll save this for just after. So I think we're ready to take any questions you might have. And we have another little bit of time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that, the very delicious looking demonstration.
Welcome.
So now we are going to begin the Q&A section. And before we open up to the audience and start asking questions, do you guys want to tell us where you can get books and reach out to you guys?
So the recipes, if anyone's interested, are on the Center for Plant-Based Living's website. Mm-hmm. They're all there. Actually, to make it easier, we were just at the Fairfax Veg Fest 2 weeks ago. And if you go to the blog section of the Center for Plant-Based Living's website, you'll see all those recipes because we did the same shows there.
We did two.
But also you can go to the recipes or you can go to the blog posts. So
you can also link it through. We have our new Doc and Chef. If you go to YouTube and in the information about each segment, there's a link to the recipes in the blog posts, and the recipes are similar.
We haven't had one yet.
Yeah. Right. It will be out there.
Yeah.
But this is on your Center for Plant-Based Living website. Yeah.
Great. And then also your YouTube channel again?
The Doc and Chef.
Yep, the Doc and Chef.
The Doc and Chef. All right, perfect. So we're gonna start opening up to the audience. So thank you for sharing that information. So before I open it up to the audience, I'm just going to go over a couple of things so that people understand how this works. So we don't take questions directly from the chat. Instead, we ask everyone to virtually raise their hand. If you're not sure how to do this, what you need to do is click on the reactions button, second from the right and the bottom of the Zoom window, then click on the raise hand function in the menu that pops up. We will then take questions in the order in which they were received. When it's your turn, I will unmute you and ask you to state where you're from and to ask your question. We ask that everyone keep their questions brief and on topic. We will then mute you. If you do wish to ask another question or a follow-up question, please just raise your hand again and we will get to you assuming we have time. So our first question is going to come from Ruth. Ruth, please let us know where you are and ask your question.
Hi, I'm from Canada, from Toronto, Ontario. And my question has to do with someone who is having to eat low oxalate foods. And that would cancel out the beans, the almonds, spinach, beets, and tofu, soy products. I don't know if anybody there knows very much about oxalates. I certainly didn't, and I know a lot of doctors don't know too much about it. But I was reading a book by Sally K. Norton, and she's a dietitian, and she talks about the effects of having high oxalates. I mean, I know that if you have a problem with kidney stones, you definitely have to go on a low oxalate diet. But aside from that, there are people who have to lower their oxalate intake, and she explains all this in the book. But this sort of eradicates everything, or pretty well, not everything, but so many of the foods that are important on a whole food plant-based diet. I'm just wondering if you know anything about that, and how can we maintain a diet like this? I mean, she says that what is good are all the animal. You could have the animal fats, eggs, and all the things that the guests on this conference are against. So, okay, that's what I want to ask you about.
Thank you.
Yes, Ruth, thank you for your question, and thank you for watching us. We both really appreciate it. I'm going to let the doctor take most of this, but this is something that I like to say just to kind of drive home the point, first of all, with the oxalates. Now, if those oxalates are heavily present in uncooked beans, so I think that you're going to be wanting to find a dentist before you find any other kind of doctor, because nobody is going to want to eat an uncooked bean, right?
That's right.
And so what happens is when you cook the beans and you cook some of the higher oxalate greens and some of these other foods that Sally says are high in oxalates, if you cook them, you cook those dangerous and harmful oxalates out, and the ones that stay are actually beneficial.
No, that's right. So I think, there's a lot of kind of talk out there around, especially in the paleo community, right, or the keto community, about anti-nutrients in food. So that includes phytates, lecithins, oxalates, and things like that. And to Sally's point, it is true that some people who are prone to kidney stones do have to be somewhat careful with oxalates, because oxalates can be the nidus, the start the kidney stone formation. However, I know of no sound scientific evidence to suggest that lecithins, phytates, oxalates, in the context of a healthy whole food plant-based diet, has any adverse health effects. It's just not true. And again, a lot of these arguments are, yes, beans have a lot of oxalates. Yes, beans have phytates. Yes,
Grains
beans have
yeah.
Exactly. But as Caryn already said, when we cook these vegetables, we cook the beans, we cook the spinach, that cooks out, if you will, these anti-nutrients. And I mean, again, for those of you who might not be familiar with the blue zones, right? So the blue zones are, Dan Buettner and National Geographic identified 5 different cultures around the world that have exceptional longevity. They have very high rates of people over 100 years old. So it's Okinawa in Japan, and Ikara in Greece, and Sardinia in Italy, the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, and then also Loma Linda, California, which we'll talk about in a second. But what do they have in common, right? So if you do a Venn diagram about what they have in common, beans are their primary source of protein, and they eat a ton of green leafy vegetables and on. So if there was somehow some anti-nutrients in these foods, I don't think that they would be the longest lived people on the world. And by the way, the reason Loma Linda, people might ask, well, why in the world would Loma Linda, California be on that list? Well, it turns out Loma Linda, California has one of the highest populations per capita of Seventh-day Adventists. And Seventh-day Adventists follow plant-based diet as part of their religious practice.
I hope that helps, Ruth.
Thank you so much. So our next question is coming from Cheryl. Cheryl, please state where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, I'm from Santa Rosa, California, and thank you so much for the very fun presentation, a fun way to learn. And my question is about coconut and specifically the saturated fat. I know you used coconut aminos, but what about unsweetened coconut milk or unsweetened coconut cream? Do you think it's safe for a healthy person that's oil-free, whole foods, plant-based to use that occasionally in a recipe? Do you ever, what I really want to know is, do you two ever use those things?
Right.
That's what she wants to know.
So again, I think the idea here is, and this is a great question because it gets to the point.
Mhm.
The idea here is, in general, we want to eat our food as close to the ground as it can. So you think about a coconut, right? You've got the coconut milk, the coconut water in the middle. And then you've got the coconut meat. And if you press that meat, you get coconut milk. Or you can really refine it completely and get coconut oil.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
So I think shredded coconut is fine. I do use some coconut milk in some recipes. But here's the thing. For people who have really high cholesterol, because you are right, most of the fat in coconut is saturated fat. So people that have really high cholesterol, or in particular, if they're trying to reverse their insulin resistance, you have to be very careful. I do not recommend using coconut milk and such as that in the 3 to 4 months it takes most people to reverse their insulin resistance. I think in the context of a healthy plant-based diet, once you've kind of got your insulin resistance under control, I think it's fine. But again, it needs to be in the context of no more than 30 to 35 grams of total fat a day, right? So if you're using coconut milk, say in a soup, a butternut squash, like I make a Thai curry butternut squash soup that I use coconut milk in, so on that day you probably don't want to be eating handfuls of nuts and things like that.
Yeah, no avocado toast that
Right,
morning.
right, exactly. So I think that coconut milk is okay. But again, the only caution is if you've got insulin resistance, prediabetes, or type 2 diabetes, you do have to be very careful with that in the initial phases where you're trying to reverse your insulin resistance.
Great. Thank you so much, Doctor. Our next question is coming from Evelyn. Evelyn, please state where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and my question is about the air fryer. So I know that with high temperatures and high carbohydrate foods, the Maillard reaction causes acrylamides in foods. And so I'm wondering if this is happening with the high heat in the air fryer. I know there's only a little bit of sugar in those coconut aminos, there's carbohydrates in the beans, and so I know it's a no-no really for potatoes and really high starchy foods. But what about anything happening with the tofu?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So the acrylamides you're talking about, you are correct. When we cook meat in particular at a high level, it does create acrylamides, which have been shown to be carcinogenic and such like that. But it's not the Maillard reaction isn't just with the sugar. It's a reaction between the sugar and the protein. And because the makeup of, as we talked about in our very first segment, because the protein content of these vegetables is much lower and it's a different makeup of amino acids, you really don't have to worry too much about it, frankly. Now, deep frying food is a different story. That's why we use the air fryer. That's another reason, by the way, that cooking oil-free is important, because when we cook oils at a high temperature, that it's above their smoke point, right? And olive oil, for example, has a pretty low smoke point. It makes what are called trans fats, which are like really bad for you, heart disease and things like that. So again, that's why the air fryer is such a powerful tool. But I don't think you have to worry about the acrylamides when you're using veggies in an air fryer, because it's where the acrylamides come from. It's a reaction between the sugar and the proteins. And because of the different protein mix, it's been shown. There's some research around that.
Doctor, you just mentioned heating up oil and that not being necessarily good. There's also talk of oil becoming carcinogenic when you
Right.
heat it up?
That's right.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's the same idea. These trans fats, it develops, AC, I'm blocking on the name, but there's some chemical reactions that occur with the oil that create these carcinogens. Also like smoking meat, same thing, cooking meat at a high temperature, cooking food, frying food. Again, that's the acrylamides and all that, those things. And so you're right. It changes the chemical properties of the oil and makes them much more highly inflammatory and bad for our DNA and our cholesterol molecules and things like that. It creates a lot of oxidative stress.
Thank you for that answer. Our next question is coming from Kay. Kay, please state where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, I'm from Wisconsin. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question on the oxalates. I understand that oxalates can prevent calcium absorption. And so I was curious about that in relation to bone health.
So again, like I said earlier, you're right, high oxalate foods, that's again, one of the arguments around the anti-nutrient properties of things like oxalate. Phytates fall into that same category. Phytates can block the absorption of things like calcium. So again, when we cook food, so for example, when you cook spinach, the oxalate content drops between 50 and 80%, right?
Between what? Say that again.
50 and 80%.
50 to 80%
less oxalates when we cook spinach, for example. So again, I think if you're eating a well-balanced whole food plant-based diet with a combination of some raw foods, some cooked foods, again, it's just not something you need to worry about.
Great, thank you very much. So, with like chickpeas and quinoa, I'm going to ask you some, a little of a cooking question here. Chickpeas and quinoa, what would make those taste good? What would you add to them? Is oil okay to add to them?
Chickpeas and quinoa.
Quinoa, yeah.
Oh,
Quinoa, not necessarily together, just kind of things that are people I think consider plain.
and you spice up your foods. Yeah.
Yes, there you go.
I gotta tell you, I mean, the spice drawer is my friend. There is one. Let me get that, the 21 seasoning. There's one. If you're watching your sodium intake, there is one seasoning that I absolutely love, and all my students here always just get a kick out of it. And in fact, in Christmas, I had a Christmas big dinner party, and I gave everybody a bottle of this, and they all laughed at me because they said, "Where'd you get it from your back room? Right? You didn't go out and shop for it," because I had so many of them. It's Trader Joe's 21 seasoning salute. They always have it. It's $1.99, has 21 herbs in it. It's fantastic. I put it in your quinoa. You could put it over chickpeas. You could put it into this chickpea salad. I definitely put it in my burger mixes, pastas. If I make a pizza, it goes on top of that. It goes in my salad dressings. So open up your spice drawer and just have a good time. Really, that's what it's all about.
Right. I mean, it's interesting when I look back before I was plant-based, and when I used to cook, most of the flavor came from salt, right?
I know, now it doesn't.
And now, you discover all of these amazing flavors in the spice drawer, like you said, that I've never heard of half of them, right? Like cardamom, I've heard of cardamom, right?
Well, I mean, Jim makes, he mentioned earlier, he makes this chickpea salad, a version of it, but with curry and dates.
Right. No, exactly.
There's so much.
And the other thing is, just speaking of health, I mean, some of the most powerful antioxidants, anti-cancer foods out there are herbs and spices, right? You look at things like turmeric, which is curcumin. So curcumin is a very, very potent antioxidant, anti-cancer compound. The quercetin in the garlic, which you can use to flavor foods, but even things like cinnamon and ginger.
Yeah.
I mean, the list goes. I mean, we could have a whole 2-hour lecture just on the health benefits of these individual spices, and we're going to get to some of those on our Doc and Chef show a little bit further down the road, where we're going to do shows on some of these specific spices. So again, it's really a playground, right?
Yeah.
To experiment around, and it's great.
Now you mentioned a few spices. Are there any that you think are like really, really like the best ones as far as if you want to add the highest nutritional value to their meals? Which ones would you choose? And then also, how are they easy to cook with? Are they easy to prepare food with so it tastes good?
So I would say the turmeric is probably the highest, at least one of the highest anti-inflammatories.
Right.
Now, and you don't need a whole lot of it. It does have a pretty earthy flavor, so it might be something that you want to get used to. The curries are good. I love
They're
using different
turmeric
curries.
based, right?
And then, but also do just, if your body doesn't absorb those very easily, those anti-inflammatory properties from the spices very easily. So we want to help it out by adding just a little bit of ground black pepper.
Right. So black pepper has shown, so curcumin is the active anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer compound in turmeric, and black pepper increases the absorption by about 40%. So turmeric, I agree, turmeric, and there's a lot of places you can hide turmeric. I love to make a tofu scramble, and you massage some turmeric in there, and guess what? It looks like eggs, right? And you add a little black salt or kala namak, which is a volcanic salt used in northern Indian cooking. It gives that eggy flavor.
Mhm.
So I put turmeric in a lot of stuff, and you can put a little bit. I mean, it has a little bit of earthy flavor, but a little bit. You can throw it in pretty much anything you want.
We could have thrown it in this soup.
Yeah,
We
and
could
you
have added
wouldn't have known. So
Yeah.
that's an easy one. And what's interesting about turmeric, by the way, there's some interesting research fairly recently that looked at people with chronic degenerative arthritis who took turmeric supplements compared to non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So that's Motrin, Aleve, ibuprofen. The benefit from the turmeric equaled that of the drugs without any side
Can you
effects.
believe that? Isn't that
Yeah.
crazy?
So when I was training for Ironman, I actually was taking a turmeric capsule just to be sure I was getting all that anti-inflammatory compounds in my body.
Thank you. And you mentioned black pepper to help absorb the turmeric. Does that work for other things? Does black pepper help absorb food in general, or nutrients from food in general, or is it unique to turmeric?
I think it's
I think
unique to
so, yeah.
turmeric. Black pepper has its own set of
That's true.
health benefits. Again, all these compounds have anti-cancer, antibacterial.
We were just reading
properties.
about the fat. Didn't ground black pepper
help burn fat.
help burns fat also.
Right.
So
Right.
add it to everything.
Right.
All right. Sounds good. Our next question is coming from Ruth. Ruth, where are you from? And ask your question.
Hi, this is a follow-up question.
Okay.
I'm from Canada. I was already asking you about the oxalates. Now I want to ask you about the tofu. I don't have an air fryer. How would you guide somebody to cook that, let's say in the oven, and at what temperature?
So
Yeah.
okay. Do you have a convection setting on your oven?
Yes, I do.
Good. So then just line a baking sheet with some parchment paper and do exactly what we did today. Marinate and lay it all out on that parchment paper on the pan. And there's usually about, a 25-degree difference. I'm just kind of spitballing here, but I'm thinking probably 15 minutes at 425. And then take a look at it, flip them all over, and then give it half that amount of time, same temperature, and see where you are. Now, here's the thing with this tofu. Some people like it really well done on the outside. Sometimes,
Crispy, yeah.
sometimes people just want just a little bit of color change and still a little soft. It's totally up to you. So whenever you find that right temperature, time combination, write it down, put it in your phone, something. But you'll be fine in the convection oven.
The other nice thing about this tofu, by the way, depending on what marinade you use, you can just throw this in the refrigerator. You can use it to dress a salad.
Oh, use it all week.
Use it as a snack. I mean, it's a great way to add, again, get that soy and the protein and the fiber that we all need.
Yeah.
And it's very versatile, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could skewer it up with vegetables and put it on the grill.
Yep.
Oh, that sounds great. All right. Our next question is coming from David. David, please ask your question.
Hi, thank you very much. This is David from Framingham, Massachusetts. And my question is, what are your thoughts about roasted nuts and seeds? I've heard some thoughts from some of the speakers, even here, that roasted nuts and seeds are like, heated oil, that carcinogen. Would like to understand and hear your thoughts about this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of any solid research to suggest that roasted nuts are carcinogenic. I mean, again, the thing is, like anything, you wouldn't want to sit down and eat a pound of roasted nuts at a setting, right? But I think roasted nuts every now and then. Now, like for me, the main nut I use, three nuts I use, and they're not roasted, are walnuts, almonds, and cashews, and I get them unroasted. I think if you have a roasted nut every now and then as a snack, I don't think you're probably more worried about the salt than anything.
Well, I think that if you are out shopping, then buying raw is the best.
That's right.
But I would imagine, I think that I have actually read some research on this. It's been a while though, so I'm a little bit rusty on it. But because of the high temperatures and the naturally occurring oils in the nuts, there is
a chemical reaction.
There is a little bit of a chemical reaction. But if you're eating copious amounts, so if you really like to snack on nuts a lot, then I would say go to raw, actually most of the time. And if you really like those roasted nuts, maybe every fourth or fifth time you go to the grocery store, that's when you get your roasted nuts. But I would say go for the raw. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have, there's some dishes like around Thanksgiving, I might do some roasted Brussels sprouts and throw a few pecans in there. So they're kind of somewhat roasted. I don't know of any solid research that's really looked at. I mean, as you know, nutritional research is notoriously difficult to do. And to trying to take 10,000 people and half of them on roasted nuts and half of them not, and control for all the other nutritional variables, it's kind of hard that's research that really can't be done. I mean, I think you are correct. There may be some theoretical concerns, but I think roasted nuts in moderation, sparingly, are probably okay.
Yeah.
And really looking for the unroasted nuts, for when you're using them from a culinary standpoint.
Unsalted, unroasted.
Right, unsalted.
Thank you. All right. Question on nitric oxide. What foods contain nitric oxide, and what are the health benefits of it?
Go first, and then I'll give you the foods. Okay? So nitric oxide. So nitric oxides are very, very important, fundamentally important for what's called endothelial function. So our blood vessels have a single cell lining called the endothelium, and for our vascular system to work appropriately, that those blood vessels need to dilate and constrict physiologically when they need to. And one of the problems is, because of the Western diet, people develop endothelial dysfunction. And so our blood vessels can't constrict and dilate. That puts you at increased risk for things like heart disease. It's actually the root cause of erectile dysfunction.
Right.
And a lot of people now think that erectile dysfunction is the canary in the coal mine for heart disease. And this is a situation where size matters, right? And what I mean by that is, the penile artery is pretty small, the coronary artery is pretty big. You get 50% blockage in your coronary artery, that might be some problems down the road, but in the short run, not that big a deal. You get 50% blockage in this little artery. Well, next thing you know, you've got erectile dysfunction. So, and there are other things, things like smoking and blood pressure and all that, which can affect it. But there are foods, which Caryn's going to talk about in a minute, which activate nitric oxide. And I can tell you, there's some fascinating research in the endurance athlete literature that by using foods that are high in that activate nitric oxide, you can increase your endurance performance by up to 10 to 15%. And again, because now you're able to deliver more blood to your muscles, you're able to clean out that lactic acid, and when you're done exercising. And I can tell you that I discovered that again when I was at 60 years old training for an Ironman. And I can tell you, I made liberal use of these high nitric oxide foods. And I think it's one of the things that helped me recover faster, not get sore, not get stiff. So nitric oxide foods.
So what you're looking for are foods that are higher in nitrates, not nitrites, nitrates, nitrate. And what happens is when you eat these nitrates, that you create more nitric oxide by chewing them. So the saliva in your mouth then mixes with the nitrates in the vegetables and creates nitric oxide. Now it also does that in your gut. So your body makes its own nitric oxide up until you're about 50 years old. And then every 10 years, you start to lose 10% of that, right? So you need to backfill, or you need to create your own nitric oxide. And again, you do these with these dark leafy greens. Beets are a big one.
Yeah.
Beet greens are a big one. And there's really walnuts.
Arugula,
the dark leafy
rhubarb
greens.
too.
Yes.
Rhubarb.
So, but there's even more to this whole nitric oxide story. Is number one, you want to not always have smoothies, because you want to chew these nitrate heavy vegetables, foods, plants. And then you want to make sure that it gets in your saliva, so you're making it here. And then it's also converting with the acid in your stomach. So along this storyline, you might want to, I did a blog post on this, and I also did a television segment on this. You might want to, if you're on any kind of, if you use mouthwash, so a therapeutic mouthwash, you may want to stay away from, because if you are eating these nitrate heavy vegetables in hopes to create more nitric oxide, if you're chewing that, but you use a therapeutic mouthwash, then you're not going to be creating that nitric oxide. And also, if you are using a PPI, not a PPI for
PPIs are called proton pump inhibitors, and they're designed to decrease stomach acid.
So like if you're taking something like Nexium or something like that, then that is going to control the acid production in your gut. And therefore you will not be making as much nitric oxide as you want to. So look at your mouthwash, look at your PPIs. Those are just some things you might want to look at. And if you're looking for more information on this, if you go to our website, go to the blog, I did a long blog post and a television segment on it as well. So, but you can just Google. I mean, if you're just looking for nitrate heavy plants or foods, that's an easy Google also.
Right. And if you want to do a deeper dive, you just go to something like PubMed and put in, beats and athletic performance. You'll see some of that research. It also, it really is almost nature's Viagra as well, because it does help men restore that endothelial function, to allow them to attain and maintain, erections and things like that. So
hope that helps. I know that was long-winded.
No, that was great. That was great. So, we only have like a minute left. So I'm going to ask you a simple question. Okay, so raw organic seeds, are they all good, or are there ones that are not good, or some better than others, like sesame, sunflower, pumpkin, flax, chia, hemp, poppy?
Yeah, no, I think they're all good. The only caveat is they do have a lot of fat. So again, if you've got prediabetes, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, you do have to be a little bit careful about over consuming the nuts and seeds. And they're an excellent source, not so much the poppy seed, but the chia seed, the hemp seed, the pumpkin seed, excellent source of plant-based omega-3 fatty acids.
Oh, but can I just say, if you're going to have flax seeds, crush them.
You got to grind it, right?
Yeah.
And Dr. Greger talks about actually grinding the chia seeds as well, to really increase the surface area so you can absorb more of those omega-3s. So absolutely nothing wrong. Sesame seeds are a great source of calcium, actually. The only caveat with the nuts and with the seeds and then nuts, the same category, is just the fat. And so it needs to be in the context of 30 to 35 grams of fat a day, especially if you're trying to reverse your insulin resistance.
Great. Thank you so much. This is a really great demonstration. I'm going to definitely check out the recipes. As I can tell in the chat, a lot of our audience are going to as well. So with that, I'm going to open up the mics and unmute the audience. You can hear a whole cacophony of thanks from the audience.
We love you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
Clap hour.
Really, really interesting. I can't wait to try.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for
tofu in
your
there.
show.